or wanted to start as a jazz musician. Did you initially train as a jazz musician, or did you get a standard classical training first?
Actually, jazz musicians don't necessarily have any real, shall we say, straightforward training. You've either got it or you don't. So consequently, it's different than training for a classical career. In other words, what does one learn as an aspiring jazz musician? You listen to the great artists, you listen to recordings, you try to see as many performances as you can, and somewhere along the line or the way, you pick out, say, an outstanding artist who really has an impact on you. And the outstanding artist that I chose was the great drummer Gene Krupa. So as far as starting a career as a jazz drummer, there were certain things that happened first. For example, at the age of 11, one day a kid brought a board with some tin cans nailed to it to school, and that was his drum kit. And I was intrigued. I had never really thought about musical instruments at all up to that point. So I said, and the kid's name was Selwyn Arms. Sounds like a condo, but that was his name. And so consequently I said, Selwyn, could you please help me put one of these together? Which meant, will you do it? Because I'm a klutz. I have zero mechanical ability. So he made a replica of his drum kit. I brought it home, turned on the radio after school. The big bands were playing, Len Miller, the Dorsey Brothers, Benny Goodman, all of the great bands. And I would hear the recordings, and I would sort of play along with them. And this was causing somewhat of a bit of pandemonium in the house, and culture shock to my mom and dad, and they wondered where this was going. So I said, you know, I want to be a drummer. I want to be a really, really great drummer. And of course, I mean, and, you know, this is what I've got right now. I got this little B-flat tin can drum kit. So I would like, if possible, for you to allow me to take lessons and learn more about music. And so they did. They were very supportive. So I got the first bit of equipment, real equipment you get, is a rubber practice pad where you play almost noiselessly, but you practice and you get a certain amount of technique. And then you, of course, along with this, you have a teacher. And my first teacher was a gentleman from New England by the name of George Tillinghast. That sounds very New Englandish. He was the drummer at the Earl Theater, which was the Earl Theater that preceded the Warner Theater downtown in Washington. So in those days, many movie houses had stage shows, and they had a pit band which played for the various acts that would be on stage. Well, Mr. Tillinghast was the drummer in that band, in that pit band. And of course, a pit band at that time would be like maybe 15 and a half players or something like that. But to me, it was like, wow, this is a great big band, you know. I want to play in a big band like this sometime, you know. So I started taking lessons. I had a book of instruction. Up to that point, I didn't know a quarter note from a fly speck. But I learned to read, I learned the notation system, and so as far as progressing to the next step, I got a real snare drum, and then I got a real drum set, which is in the archives. A picture of it is in the archives of George Mason right now. It was, by today's standards, what we would call a rather B-flat drum kit. In the music business, we use the term B-flat to actually describe something that is far from high-end. So B-flat is like the bottom of the pole. Okay. So I had my B-flat drum set, and I started to played with little bands, and I joined the union at the age of 16. And then I got a real good drum set. Now, Gene Krupa had this wonderful, wonderful drum set, uh, specially made. The exterior of the drums were in a beautiful white pearl finish. I wanted to get a drum set like that. So I persuaded my folks to put up the dime and went to New York to this dealer who specialized in making this equipment, and I got my Gene Krupa drum set. And you talk about being in hog drum heaven, I mean, there it was. So I'm finishing high school, and it's time for the talk. Mom and Dad sit me down and say, you know, you're finishing high school. What are you going to do next year? I said, well, you know, I really would like to study music. They said, well, you don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a scientist? I said, no, I want to be a drummer. I said, and I want to go to Juilliard, which is, you know, a high-end school. So the ulterior motive of going to Juilliard was to be in New York, 52nd Street. So if I got into Juilliard, I could very easily get to 52nd Street every night and hear the bands, hear the groups, and maybe get a chance to sit in. That was the focus. That was the project. So I auditioned for Juilliard, and the artist that I auditioned for was Saul Goodman, who was the principal timpanist of the New York Philharmonic. Now, Saul Goodman was a very, very scary-looking guy. He looked like a character from a mafioso movie, and he sounded like one, like real New York tough guy sound, and kind of scary. Anyway, I played what I knew on the snare drum, and for some reason, I was accepted. So, packed up everything, went off to Juilliard, and the very first year was not devoted necessarily to big lessons with Mr. Goodman. The first year was devoted to getting downtown and see if I can get in a jam session. And finally, I did get a chance to sit in with the band at a place on 52nd Street. Next, didn't stop traffic. It was a devastating failure. It just didn't work. So I said, okay, I think we got to switch to Plan B. Plan B was to start buckling down and going for my studies more at Juilliard. So I applied myself, really went for it. I started playing in little Sunday morning orchestras, like, for example, the Czechoslovakian Society Orchestra of America, which had about 11 and a half players. On Sunday mornings, I was the half player. And we would saw through Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, and I learned my first real taste of repertoire with that group. The very first concert I played was with one of the orchestras at Juilliard. I keep on thinking that, you know, well, it's true, Juilliard had more than one orchestra, but I'm exaggerating when I say this was the 10th orchestra. There wasn't a 10th orchestra, but I felt like maybe that's where I belonged at that time, in the 10th orchestra. So we played the Schubert Unfinished Symphony, and I was hooked. I loved it. So in other words, I was now into the classical training.
Right.
Into that part, which I then devoted the major part of my life to, you know.